Hey there friends, this is a sad story today. I've been waiting a couple days on this before I did any kind of a video on it, simply because the facts were still a little bit sketchy, and so much of the information that was coming out was not really clear, and sometimes it contradicted other official statements that had been put out. This is in regards to the airman in Florida, Okaloosa County, who had gotten shot in an apartment. At first, it seemed was a case of mistaken identity. But first, go check out my friends, Attorneys on Retainer. I mentioned in a video a couple of weeks ago that insurance companies will keep you out of the poor house, but attorneys will keep you out of the big house. Attorneys on Retainer does just that. There are only 3 qualifiers for coverage. These are if you're charged with a crime, misdemeanor, or a felony, that you reasonably and in good faith assert self-defense as a defense to the criminal charge that you are being charged with, and of course, the third qualifier, you have to have already been a customer of Attorneys on Retainer prior to making that very important phone call to them. Go to attorneysonretainer.us. Again, attorneysonretainer.us. When you sign up, use my discount code FTATF and get a massive discount. Again, FTATF for huge savings, attorneysonretainer.us. Friends, I'm going to show the video as all this is taking place and describe a little bit of it because the video doesn't perfectly describe this. Allegedly, there was a complaint, law enforcement was called, of domestic violence, somebody beating or yelling at, fighting with their girlfriend. When the law enforcement officer gets to the apartment complex where the call was summoned to, he encounters somebody, a neighbor or somebody who works there. I'm not clear on that, but it doesn't really matter. It's somebody who supposedly knows the area. This person directs the law enforcement officer to the apartment number 1401, which is the apartment that the law enforcement officer goes to where the airman was shot. During all of this, she is explaining that she's passed that apartment and she's heard not only arguing, but a slap. So this law enforcement officer makes his way there. And at that point, he knocks on the door. Now, there are differing testimony, and we'll talk about that here in a second, or at least different reports of what took place from inside and from outside the apartment. Let's take a look at the video and finish watching it here.
Saying that it happens frequently.
Okay.
But this time it sounded like it was getting out of hand.
Okay, which door?
I don't know. I'm not sure. 2 weeks ago, I was walking by their apartment, basically, on this side, and I was hearing someone yell, like, shut the up, like, you stupid B-word and all this other stuff, and I heard a slap, like, right after it, but I wasn't sure where it came from, and I couldn't call, like, I didn't want to call the police, and, you know.
Which room is it?
1401.
1401, okay.
1401. But the girl sounded scared, the one that called. She said, she was like, it sounds like it's getting really out of hand.
So it's hit number 4, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you do me a favor? We stand out there and direct the other deputy that's coming to this area?
It's not, you're going to go up to the 4th floor and it's going to be on this side.
Gotcha. Three 12 and 111.
Sheriff's office, open the door. Step out. Drop the gun! Drop the gun!
It's over there.
Drop the gun!
I don't have it.
312, shots fired. Suspect down. Do not move! 312, get EMS.
So one of the things that has come out since all of this story took place was that the airman was talking to his girlfriend via FaceTime, inside the apartment when the law enforcement officer knocked on the door. Again, presumably the wrong door, and we'll get to that here in a second. The girlfriend states that he heard somebody knocking on the door but did not hear the announcement of the law enforcement officer saying that he was police. Several things could play into that. For one, maybe they have good insulation. You know, this is a stucco wall that you see here, and it's likely got drywall on the inside. So there's probably a little bit of muffling of the noise. Also, I noticed the law enforcement officer steps to the side of the door rather than being in the door, where there could be furniture and all kinds of other things on the other side of that wall, further muffling the sound of the law enforcement guy saying, "I'm law enforcement." You know, the sound of the beating on the door is pretty easy. It looks like a hollow core door that the guy is beating on. So it's very possible that easily the knocking was heard, but not what the guy was saying. Plus, this guy was the airman, was on the phone with his girlfriend, FaceTiming. That's another noise source right in front of this guy. He's not expecting anybody, so he's not standing at the door waiting on somebody. He just hears a loud banging on the door. And again, as that officer steps off to the side, that's when he is saying, "Hey, I'm law enforcement." So, you know, you've got several things coming into play here as to why this airman did not hear this guy announce. I do believe the airman did not hear that. Why else, if he believed law enforcement was at the door, it's very unlikely he would have come to the door with a gun in his hand, although it was at his side. And that's the other thing. The whole argument by law enforcement is that the guy felt threatened for his life. Let's assume the guy was at the right apartment, and let's assume that this was a guy that was beating his girlfriend. Do you think a guy opening the door with a firearm in an unthreatening way at his side, would you have just immediately unloaded 6 rounds into him? And I'm being serious here. I'm curious what everybody else thinks. Personally, I don't think I would have. I feel like the guy is not showing any signs of a threat. He does not seem unreasonable in any kind of way as far as answering the door. He's not aggressive when he doesn't whip the door open. Again, the gun is just sitting there. I truly believe the airman thought he didn't know who was on the other side of the door, and he opened that with caution. I don't see anything wrong with that. There's nothing he did wrong. He didn't know who was on the other side of his door. He opened it. He was in a non-threatening position with the firearm. What's wrong with that? First of all, maybe don't open the door. I guess that's the other option. But he felt the need to open the door. Maybe it was courtesy, maybe it was respect. Maybe just wanted to see what was out there. We need to quit trying to blame this guy for something he did. Because if he truly was the wrong apartment that they came to, he had no reason to think law enforcement would be coming to his door. None. So he's thinking, who in the heck is knocking at my door? He's thinking it's somebody who doesn't belong there. I don't fault him one bit for getting his firearm and for having it available to him. He didn't brandish it. He wasn't aiming at the guy. Again, non-threatening. Now let's address the allegation of the law enforcement officer being at the wrong apartment. If you notice here, Mr. Crump, who is the race-baiting attorney that the family has gotten, you'll know this guy. He's the George Floyd type guy, who's the guy who hands up, don't shoot, but actually attacked the law enforcement officer. He's that guy. Like, anytime somebody does something wrong and they get shot by anybody, they call this guy if the guy's black. So this adds a negative element to the story, although in this case, I don't think they need Crump, because I do believe that this has nothing to do with race. This is literally, having Crump there is a waste of time, because he's a race baiter and he's trying to focus things from a race standpoint, but it's got nothing to do with race. This was just not being prepared on law enforcement's part. But they do address in this news report here, and this is surprising to me, Crump said the witness believed the officers were in the wrong apartment as Fortson was alone at the time with no disturbance at his residence. The very next line, the sheriff on Thursday denied that officers had gone to the wrong address. Now, there are several ways you can look at this as being at the wrong address. They may be saying we were at the right place, just the wrong apartment. I'm being honest here, because why else would they say that they were at the right address? Well, maybe it was the right address, the wrong apartment number. But at the same time, it is possible that they were at the right apartment. Does it make him shooting the guy okay? I don't think so. I still don't think that changes anything. The guy was in a non-threatening position. If he was at the wrong apartment complex, it's not the law enforcement officer's fault that they were at the wrong address, although he should have confirmed where these people lived before going there, I believe. But if he thinks there's an imminent threat and it's right there, I understand the heat of the moment type situation. But let's not forget, it was this other woman who specifically said 1401 and brought him to that exact location as if she knew that's where it was, which brings up question marks as to whether or not this may have been the right address. Maybe the girlfriend simply wasn't there at that point during the time the law enforcement left. Maybe she could have left. So there's a lot of question marks still. Again, that's kind of why I pumped the brakes on this story for the last couple of days, although a little bit of information is starting to trickle out a little bit. I also think it's very much worth mentioning that, remember, this Okaloosa Sheriff's Department is the exact same area and the same agency that Acorn Boy ran and barrel rolled and unloaded a couple of magazines into his own squad car with his suspect handcuffed in the back seat, who was not shooting at him. Squirrel knocked an acorn out of a tree, hit the top of his vehicle. He said, "Shots fired!" And then he started shooting at whomever. Even his own partner was downrange from him, and he could have shot her. So, and she was unloading into the vehicle also. So clearly there is some training issues at this one department, and I'm being very honest here. I'm not trying to blame law enforcement, but it looks like these people are very trigger happy. These people are probably not prepared mentally or even physically to handle stressful situations, because they're not handling things that are, I think, the average person would handle a whole lot different. They're not handling things right. It's almost like they just assume everything is going to be a shootout when they go somewhere. So they're ready to shoot at any given moment. Looking into this area, I don't see a whole lot of violent crime in this area. You know, I'm not saying there's none. There's the same amount that's everywhere else. So it's not like they're in downtown Detroit, Baltimore, New Orleans, and some of these crap holes out there where they can expect to be shot at on a regular basis. That is not the case in this county where they're at. So I do believe there's a certain level of training that's going to have to take place over here, because there's too much going on over here. I mean, there's the guy with the barrel roll and the acorn is lucky that the suspect in the back seat wasn't shot. Thankfully, these people are horrible shots and they were not able to actually hit him. Now, I want to bring up real quick a couple of points that people are bringing up that this should not even be talked about. Again, is race. Remember, the race baiting Crump is the lead attorney for the family. They immediately reached out. He probably immediately reached out to them when he realized it was a black man shot by somebody else who was not black. I'm a little bit disturbed by how people are ignoring the blatant racism by their own people. And what I mean by their own people, the people, not just black people, the people on the left who want to scream racism all the time. This includes white people who want to take ownership and they have white guilt. So they make unfounded accusations about racism because it makes them feel better. They can go to a tea party with all their rich friends and say, "Look at me, I took up for the black guy," and they don't even have any black friends, or black acquaintances. But I found it a little bit odd that Crump makes an assumption in his own statement that's extremely racist in my eyes. If you notice right here, it says, "It is at this point that Fortson is said to have grown concerned and retrieved his gun, which the lawyer said was legally owned." Why would we assume with a young black man having a gun that it might have been illegally owned? There are a lot of black people and minorities who have guns out there, more that have guns that are legally owned and not stolen. I assume when they say legally owned, they mean it wasn't stolen, right? Are we to assume from a black attorney that anytime a young black man has a gun that it must be stolen? Is that... I see some backhanded racism here that this guy doesn't even know that he's espousing. Why would we assume that? I would never just immediately assume, regardless of anybody's color, race, creed, or whichever, that, oh, he got shot? Did he steal his gun? Why would I assume that? The hundreds of millions of legally owned guns out there, and you assume this guy, because he's black, stole his gun? I think that's a little bit iffy right there. And I think that Crump needs to take a step back and look at himself. Again, we're talking about this race-baiting attorney here that's so wrapped up in racism, he may not even realize how racist he is to assume something as stupid and silly as that. And it's not just him. Your girl over there at Giffords, of course, we know Gabby Giffords is not mentally capable of running her organization. The people who run it made an X-post. In that post, they say, just 23 years old, Senior Airman Roger Fortune was lawfully armed when he was killed by Florida police who were in the wrong apartment. Let's address that first comment right there. Suddenly, they like to talk about people being lawfully armed. When they talk about gun statistics and their, quote, gun violence numbers, they never talk about the unlawfully armed people, meaning the crooks who have stolen their guns and they're shooting at people to murder them. They never separate lawfully and unlawfully armed. They sought the need to do that right here. Why? Because race was involved. And somehow they're trying to make this about race when it's not, because that's the flavor of the day. That's going to get them clicks and likes and comments. Well, people are blowing their X account, Twitter account up. But again, they're saying they're trying to lay blame now on the police department. Look at the next sentence right there. Gun ownership is rarely questioned among white Americans, yet black gun owners face hostility and violence. Let's look at that again. Gun ownership is rarely questioned among white Americans. Let's address that first. Gun ownership among white Americans is always questioned. In fact, if you are white and you own a gun, you're automatically assumed to be a white supremacist. It's questioned daily by these people and any of the wackos on the far left. So that is a false statement in and of itself. The next part is equally troublesome. Yet black gun owners face hostility and violence? The only black gun owners that face hostility and violence on a regular basis are the ones in gangs shooting at each other at 2 a.m. in the morning. And it ain't violence and hostility from us or even law enforcement. They're doing it to themselves. So yes, I do see the violence and the hostility. But that's not exclusive to race either. It just so happens that more of them are shooting at each other. It's more a product of their upbringing and the location of where they are. You go into some redneck hillbilly trailer park at 2 a.m. in the morning, you're going to probably find people shooting at each other there too. But to say that black gun owners face hostility and violence and you don't put that in context because you're trying to make an assumption that everybody's shooting at black people out there, that's just wrong. In fact, if you want to look at some numbers about white people being shot by law enforcement, if that's what they're trying to imply here, that law enforcement is the problem shooting at black people, let's look at these numbers. According to the FBI's own law enforcement shooting statistics, last year law enforcement killed 425 white people. Last year, law enforcement killed 229 black people. Last year, law enforcement killed 133 Hispanics. So first of all, maybe these old ladies over at Giffords and all these other anti-gun organizations should read a little bit, maybe do a little bit of research before you run your mouth. I also find it equally ironic that these same ladies over at Giffords and everywhere else, all these anti-gun organizations, are over here throwing blame at law enforcement and saying gun violence is gun violence, even if law enforcement do it. They've made posts like that. I think the Every Town for Crazy Moms made a post similar to that. But they're making these posts that are very anti-police. They're back onto that again. These are the same ladies that think that none of us should have firearms and that only police should have them. Yet they're sitting here bagging on police for shooting up people. Which is it? Are you saying that nobody should be armed, including police? Because that's what you're implying here. We know you don't want us to be armed, but now you don't want law enforcement to be armed. Do you know who would be the only ones armed if us and law enforcement were not? Think about that, old ladies. The irony of groups of old white ladies saying what black people need and what's best for black people is not lost on me. This is very, very simply democratic the way these people do this. They have put these people in slaves and chains their entire lives and continue to put them in figurative chains and keep them as figurative slaves now. And they think it's okay to say, we know what's best for the black people.
You have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
I got several questions about all this, and a lot of it's directed at you guys because I really want to know how you folks think. First of all, do you think this is a good shoot? They may have been at the right apartment. They may have been at the wrong apartment. I do think that affects things a little bit as far as if this airman really was beating his girlfriend, it changes the dynamics as to why they were there, the law enforcement officers. It doesn't change the hair trigger and the law enforcement. I don't think that has any kind of play whatsoever, wrong apartment, right apartment, on whether or not this guy should have been shot. So you're telling me that if you're suspected of domestic abuse and you answer a door with a gun in your hand, it's okay for you to be shot? That's what they're saying. They're saying that this law enforcement officer assumed the threat was life-threatening, and he made that judgment to end this guy's life. I don't understand that. Again, right or wrong apartment, I don't think that it's okay to do that. So I want to know what your thoughts are on that. My other question that I want to leave you guys with, and it's along that same lines. So this young man lost his life because somebody saw a gun in his hand in a non-threatening position, but assumed it was a life-threatening situation. They shot him. Okay? We talk all the time about how law enforcement are protected and they're immune to any kind of things that would apply to us. What if my daughter, there was a accusation that her boyfriend was beating her? What if I lived, I don't know, a couple of blocks away? What if I called 911 while I was on my way to the apartment where my daughter called 911 and called me, said my boyfriend is beating me up? What if I didn't know what apartment she was in? What if I showed up to apartment 1401 and that was the wrong apartment? What if this guy opened the door and he had a gun in his hand and I shot him? What would happen? I could easily say, I thought this was the boyfriend that was beating my daughter, and I shot him because he had a gun. What would happen to me? You follow what I'm saying? And let me really twist this around a little bit on this exact situation. What if the law enforcement officer was at the wrong apartment, right? What if when he shot at this young man, fearing for his life because somebody who's at the wrong apartment is shooting at him, what if he shot back? What if he shot the law enforcement officer right between the eyes and he lived and the law enforcement officer died? What would have happened? How would this young man have been treated had he shot the law enforcement officer in self-defense because he feared for his life from somebody who was shooting at him and had no reason to, and he shot and killed the law enforcement officer? What would have happened? You think he'd still be in jail right now?
God save the Queen, man.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America.
He's so